Hello and welcome to Kit's Photography for this time. In this episode I'm going to be talking about aperture and how it affects focal length. Hello and welcome to Kit's Photography. I'm Kit from Bremac Photography here in sunny South Australia. Welcome to my channel. So I've been asked by a viewer to explain aperture because it can be really complicated, but it doesn't have to be. It's something which is absolutely essential in photography and is so important when it comes to making the photographs that you want to take look the way you want them to look. So aperture is actually a really simple thing. The only thing that really makes it complicated is that the numbers don't really correspond with the size. The lower the number, the larger the aperture. And that's something which a lot of people just can't get their head around. So the best way to explain it is to demonstrate and show you a hypothetical. When I first started out in photography, I had a diagram drawn of how aperture works, and it really helped me all the way along. I still have it today, 15 years later. Now, I like to do my demonstration using chopsticks, like these. Really simple explanation. So if you can picture this being what's in focus, so your focal length, and this being how much light goes onto the sensor. So on a very high aperture, very small size, you'd see a tiny little hole. But all this is in focus. But if you make it a wide aperture, lower the number, more light gets in, more light touches the sensor, but what you end up seeing is the focal length narrows. So only this bit's in focus. Now that doesn't mean that you have to be that close from the camera. In fact, this can move around. This can move around completely. It doesn't have to be just there. But what it does mean is that you have an object like my friend Roger Moore here, and the focal length moves as you focus, moves around. So in infinity, you'd find that this would be way away from your camera, but if it's something close, it's going to be really close. So what you're going to see though, if it's really wide, let's say like f1.4, what you're going to see is that only half of Roger Moore is in focus. And that may be what you want. That's why when people say, oh, I'm taking photographs of a portrait, generally somewhere between f4 and f8 works really well, because you don't want it to be just a portion of their nose in focus. You want it to be what you want. So to explain it now in a more practical sense, let's do an experiment. So I have my Nikon D850 here with a Sigma 50mm 1.4 lens on it. And I'm going to take a photograph here of Roger Moore, my mini Manfrotto tripod, and my 28 to 300mm Nikon lens. So this lens here I'm using right now goes up to f16. So it's 1.4 to f16. So let's see how it works. So f16, 14, 13, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7.1, 6.3, 5.6, 5, 4.5, 4, 3.5, 3.2, 2.8, 2.5, 2.2 to 1.8, 1.6 and 1.4. Now you can really see the difference between these photographs. Now if I put up here f1.4 and f16, now you can see here as it goes to a larger aperture, as in a bigger hole, you'll then see how the image changes. How does that work in a mechanical sense? So I have here my Nikon 50mm 1.8 lens, and it has this little device on the back which allows me to change the aperture. So you can see here there's a tiny little hole just in there. Now if I move this, well, it becomes really big, small, really big, small. So that's f22 there at the moment, that tiny little pinprick. But if I make it really big, as you can see, that's f1.8. So essentially it's allowing more light in touching the sensor. But as I said before with the chopsticks, when you do that, you raise this point up like this, more light touches the sensor and your focal length narrows. Pretty simple stuff, but it's really important to know. Now, it doesn't just happen on a lens like this. You can actually simulate having a very, very wide aperture while using lenses which don't actually have a wide aperture. So for instance, I've got here my extremely heavy Nikon 200 to 500mm lens, which has a standard aperture of 5.6. That means when you zoom in and zoom out, it stays the same. Now the thing that is remarkable about this is, when you look down this, you can see the hole there. Now that hole is actually f32. It's a pretty damn big hole. It gets bigger, it gets much, much bigger to get that 5.6. But the actual hole is a lot larger than the hole made by the 1.8. But the reason for that is you have to get through all this lens here, and if I extend it, all that lens, and so the amount of light that gets through is dramatically reduced, which is why it's only f5.6. So this Nikon 28 to 300mm lens is a little bit different again, because when you zoom in and out, the f-stop actually changes. It goes from 3.5 to 5.6, 5.6, 3.5. And that's because you've got a longer length of tube to get your light through. But this one does actually have a switch on the back. So you can see here, that tiny little hole, that's f22, that's f3.5, 22, 3.5. Now if I hold that down and then I zoom in like that, now that appears to be getting bigger, but that's because the focal length is, I've zoomed right in, so it's much larger. Now the thing about this is that you can actually simulate having a very, very wide aperture by zooming in. Think of sports photographers, how they can sit 100 meters back from something and they can zoom in, and what they find is that you've got a juicy background and it looks absolutely amazing, but in fact their lens may only go to f2 or may even only go to f5.6 like mine over there. So what's happening there is, because their position is very far away but they're zoomed right in, the aperture appears to be much greater than it actually is. So I hope you understand aperture a little bit better than you did before the video started, and I really hope you've enjoyed this video for this week. Thank you so much for keeping with it for this long. I really do appreciate it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. That is so important. It really does help my channel every time somebody likes and every time somebody subscribes. And until next time, I'll see you then.